Welcome to an all-new episode of Get Lit with Lianna, the podcast. Join me as I sit down with a new guest author in each episode to discuss their books, careers, and everything in between. Today I'm joined by author Kelley McNeil to chat about her new book, MAYLUNA. MAYLUNA seems to have taken the Bookstagram, book talk world by storm. It's literally all I've been hearing about lately. So once I got my hands on this book, I knew I had to have Kelley on the podcast to talk about it. This is a sweeping love story that spans 3 decades, and it's really one of the most emotional books I've read in a long time. It reminded me of pieces of Daisy Jones and the Six, The Idea of You, Almost Famous. If you're someone that likes rock star romances or music love stories, this is 100% for you. We don't get into too much detail of the book in this conversation because I really wanted to ensure that it was spoiler free. So if you have not yet read the book, do not hesitate. You could totally listen to this episode. But I really encourage you to pick up the book, read it, slide into my DMs. I think this is one of my favorite books of the year. I know it's one of my favorite books of the year. So please enjoy. I'm so excited. And without further ado, my conversation with Kelley McNeil starts right now. Welcome, Kelley, to the podcast. I'm very excited to have you here. I just finished MAYLUNA last night. I was really trying to savor it because I was so obsessed from like literally the first pages. I was absolutely hooked. So I'm so thrilled to get to chat with you today and get to talk about this book. But before we dive in to this story, I would love to know just like a little bit more about you and your writing background and like maybe take me back a bit to before MAYLUNA, before a day like this. Just bring me back a little bit.
Okay. Well, first, thanks for having me here today. It's fun to talk with you, so I appreciate being here.
Of course.
So yeah, I've been, it's funny. I've been writing my whole life. I was one of those kids that always had a pen in my hand and was like had my head in the clouds. I was an only child, and it was like working parents, only child. I was either playing really great music or writing something or reading something. So I feel like writing has always been a huge part of my personality, but music was something that I loved. And so I went into the music industry first.
Okay.
It was something I really felt very passionate about and was so excited to do. So I went into the backstage world of music and specifically concert promotions.
Okay.
So I did that for about a decade.
Wow.
And yeah, so and I loved it, but then I had my children
Yeah.
and decided it was not something that I was going to be wanting to do while also raising my kids. So I had taken time off, and my kids were very young, and I kind of had the mental space and emotional space and the bandwidth to be able to start writing
Okay.
in earnest, but I had not made that decision yet. I was just still like doing it the same way I always had,
Okay.
just here and there, writing things down and thinking, oh, I love to write. But then it was when the story of MAYLUNA came to mind, that it was like, it just kind of all, and I say this in my acknowledgments, it just sort of downloaded in this like 5-minute song that I was listening to on the radio. And it was like Carter and Evie and the band and Tommy and Alex, like the whole thing just showed up. And so I started writing, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And so, yeah, I would write in the middle of the night, which is so fitting for MAYLUNA.
Yeah.
But I wrote in the middle of the night, usually between like 12 and 3 or 12, 3, 4 in the morning while the kids were like babies. So while they were sleeping. And then, yeah, so I signed with my literary agent very shortly after finishing MAYLUNA. Had a different name at the time, and it was all the same stuff, but it was just a little bit different. And yeah, so that was what started my writing career in earnest. But then we did not like it, there were a lot of revisions, and we decided to eventually shelve MAYLUNA and work on a different project. And that's when I wrote A Day Like This.
Right.
So, yeah.
So crazy. So after A Day Like This came out, was it then when you kind of had the thought like maybe we should revisit MAYLUNA or the story that was MAYLUNA if it wasn't titled MAYLUNA. Like, how did that decision
Hmm.
come to be? Because I feel like it's super unique to have written a book or had a whole concept of a story done
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
shelve it, do something
Hmm.
else, have that be your first published work, and then like go back to the first project you had been working on for so long. Like, what was that decision or thought process like?
Yeah, it's so funny because we had just gotten renewed interest in the original story of Mayluna, but I was already like sort of halfway through A Day Like This, and it was starting to feel like it really was the story that needed to be told first. I'm not sure how else to describe it. It was just like, and it's funny. You hear it's not that unusual because there are so many authors who will write one, two, three novels and they never get published. And
Mhm.
so it's like their debut novel, maybe their fourth or fifth novel,
Right.
you know. So, and then there are other stories of writers whose agents send those books out on submission and then they just don't get bought for whatever reason. So it's not that uncommon in the writing world to have that happen. But yeah, so after A Day Like This came out, I was starting to write my next book and I was about like maybe 30% of the way through it and I just was not feeling it. I was like, this is just not, but Carter and Evie were like chattering in the back of my mind. And I just said, you know what, this story, it needs to be told. I talked about it with my agent a little bit and um, yeah, I had decided to just make some adjustments to the way the story of Carter and Evie was told. And so I basically restructured the story, like rewrote parts of it, and then it turned out to be exactly what it needed to be. So, like, it 100% happened that way for a reason because, you know, it just, yeah, it wouldn't have worked as well had I done it the first time. So it came out exactly as it was supposed to and exactly when it was supposed to.
Right. So you
Hmm.
mentioned that like the inspiration or like the thought, the download of the story came to
Yeah.
listening to a song. Can you like explain more how that happened? Like, did you have any inkling of like, this is what I want to write about? I mean, obviously you had mentioned you had a background in the music business, so that was something you
Hmm.
well versed in. There wasn't a lot of research that needed to go into it because it was like lived
Right.
experience. But how did
Hmm.
like, the inspiration of this story hit you? Like, can you, I don't know if you're willing to share the song that you were listening to, like, what was that and how did that come to be?
Well, okay. So the song itself, I'm not sharing with anybody. I've gotten this question a lot because it's in the acknowledgments, but I've decided not to share it because music is such a personal and subjective thing. And I kind of want like once I say it, it'll be out there and then it'll be positioned
It'll
in a
skew
way that is
people's, yeah.
exactly. And so, but what I would love is for everybody to come up with their own Mayluna song. So it's like, what is it to you? What does this type of story mean to you? And when, you know, because you may be a fan of a completely different genre than I am. And so that story may feel very connected to you in a different type of song. So that's why I'm not really putting it out there.
Okay,
But
fair.
yeah, I had not, I had, you know, not really planned to write a book about the music industry. It wasn't the music industry that I was writing about. It was Carter and Evie. So when that in music and writing go hand in hand to me, I like pretty much cannot write without music. It's that strong of a connection. So I have playlists that I make to and this is different than like the public playlist that I've put out for MAYLUNA, but I have writing playlists and they almost act as mental cues. So when I hear that very first song, it's like my brain just turns on and says, okay, now it's time to like listen for whatever words and story are going to come out now. So, and I get very inspired by music. So I think that day I was just like, and I remember where I was, everything. It was just like Carter appeared first. And so I was like, okay, this is Carter and this is his story. And then Evie a moment later. And it was like, wow, okay. And then the band members
Yeah.
and that's the way it has with a day like this too. When I was writing it, it was I would have a song would come on and then like a whole new subplot would appear. So that's just kind of the way music works with me.
That's so
Yeah.
cool. So for those who have
Mhm.
not yet read MAYLUNA, I mean, I feel like it's everywhere right now, and we'll get to that. But what exactly is the book about? Obviously, spoiler free, but the
Mhm.
little elevator pitch of the story.
So MAYLUNA it's the story of this legendary band from the late 90s, and they're very iconic and like mysterious, enigmatic lead singer. And then their, kind of mysterious connection to this woman that nobody has ever heard of. And this woman had a profound impact on the band and the lead singer and the trajectory of their lives. But nobody's ever heard that story because she got lost sort of in the history of the band. And she herself kept the whole thing a big secret. So many years later, she has now, she's grown children, and they find like a photo of this famous photo from the 90s of the lead singer of the band and this woman. And it's this very like romantic kind of ethereal photo. And they realize that it's their mom, which seems to be absolutely impossible to them. And so the story of MAYLUNA is actually the story of the band as told from Carter, who is in one place telling the entire story of his relationship with this woman, and the band, they're telling their story, and then Evie is telling her story. Her in the book is like it's told through their thoughts primarily, as books are when we're listening, when we're reading the point of view of a character. So it's not like she's verbatim reading it aloud to, saying these words aloud to her children, but and neither is Carter when he's telling the story. But it's like, if you're telling a story to people, the memories are playing like movies in your mind. So you're not telling the person every single detail, you're recalling it in your mind. And
Mhm.
that's the feel of the book. It's them recalling this whole thing in their mind. And then every once in a while, they'll say a word, something out loud to the people they're telling the story to. And then you're kind of reminded of the setting in
Mhm.
which this is all unfolding.
Yes. So
That's a very long explanation for what MAYLUNA is, but you gave me the opportunity. So there you go.
yes. There's so many pieces of what you just said that I'm dying to like pick apart and talk to you about. But I
Okay.
loved the techniques in which you wrote this book. It was so different because it's a then and now. It's a dual point of view. It's written in form of like an interview, a conversation, memories. Like you use so many literary techniques
Hmm.
bundled into one. And what's so insane about it, and I kept saying it as I was reading the book, and like I was having conversations with people in my DMs who were also reading it, is
Okay,
that
cool.
it literally plays out like a movie. It's written like a movie. And I'm somebody, and I don't know if you're someone like this too, but I'm someone when I read a book, I'm like watching it in my head. That's always me. It's like
Sure.
playing out like a movie. I see
Hmm.
it. But this was a
Hmm.
different experience because not only was that happening to me, which happens naturally, it also just felt like it was written movie-like. I can't explain
Hmm.
it, but
Hmm.
it was executed, was unlike anything I had read before. And I know how
Hmm.
hard it must be for an author, so you, to kind of marry all these different literary techniques in one and have it be so like cohesive. So I'm wondering
Hmm.
if that decision was like, and if it was hard to write and that outlining process, like all of the actual nitty gritty of formulating the story, like from a writing tech,
Hmm.
what that was like.
Hmm. I love that question, and it's such a good question. Yeah, it was, you know, um, I think I broke just about every rule in writing with this book. So it's like, you have to, and writing teachers will often tell their students, you have to learn every single writing rule in order to be able to write well. But after you've learned them, then you can feel free to break them. But you have to learn them first. And so there are a lot of broken rules in this book. And it's because, yeah, like you mentioned, it's like this strange timeline. I play with the time. I play with the point of view. The tense goes from like present to past. It's like it's all over the place. But so I will say that was a challenge, a challenge to work with, but it was necessary in order to formulate the story the way I wanted it. And so sometimes, it'd be the middle of the night, and I'd be like, okay, wait, who knows what at this point, and where,
Yeah.
and I would have to kind of keep it together. And I don't outline when I write. I very much, but I did know the whole story ahead of time. So even though it wasn't a technical outline, I knew where it was going and what I needed to say. I will say that the big rewrite that happened, as I mentioned, that there was a revision from that an original draft from a number of years ago. And what I had done differently this time was I decided the first version of this book was entirely through Evie's perspective. So you can imagine when I decided it needed to have Carter's perspective and the band's perspective as well. Because see, what was happening is I realized, we were seeing it through the lens of this woman who had had a very traumatic childhood. She had, a skewed lens of herself and her own value. She had, we also, so she's a little unreliable in that way. And so, in order to get the full picture of what actually happened, we needed to get the band's perspective and Carter's. And that was what was missing all along. And that's why I love that it got published now as opposed to before.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I ended up having to there's a lot on the cutting room floor because, just like so many scenes had to get cut from this book in order to make room to rewrite it with this other perspective. So that was like emotionally hard to let these scenes go. But I had done the technique with the weird timeline, and playing with those sorts of things in an unconventional way. I had done that with A Day Like This. So it was a skill that I was bringing to the table, that I was able to work with.
It's so funny because my sister-in-law was reading it at the same time as me. And she started it like a day later. So she was a few chapters behind.
Oh,
and
right. Mm-hmm.
A few nights ago we were together and I was still reading, but as I mentioned at the beginning, I was reading this really slowly. Like I was really trying to savor it.
Thank you, by the way.
And she asked me a question and I said something and she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Wait, we're in different timelines. Don't listen to me. Just keep reading." Like I totally was confused as to where I was in the book and what timeline, like what chapter I was on and where she was. And I was like, just keep going. Like it makes no sense. We're not at the same, we can't discuss.
Yeah.
So
right.
it's so interesting how like you have a really different experience with the book at every part you're at because of every stage of every and Carter's relationship. Like you're just really taken through that journey. But before we talk more about the book, obviously the reception so far has been quite literally crazy. Like it was an Amazon first reads. So I feel like that's how a lot of people found it. I'm a major fan of rock star romances, rock star love stories.
Okay.
So immediately, I think when the book came out at the beginning of January on Amazon, people started messaging me like, "You have to read this. You're going to love this. It has so many like things that feel like things that you love, like you're going to love it." And I was just like, "Oh, okay." Like, so I reached out to you and that's kind of how this started for me. But since then, everyone is talking about this book. It's on my TikTok everywhere. Like, like for you to see this story just like be praised high, low, sideways before it even really comes out. Like, what is that feedback and that like reception been like so far?
I was not sure how this book was going to be received because one of the things about it that makes it a little bit complex is that it is not your traditional romance, but on the surface, it sounds like rock star romance, right? But that's not what the book is really about. And so it's a love story, but it is not in the genre of romance because it doesn't have those elements that you know what I'm trying to say. It's like so I wasn't sure how it was going to be received because I didn't know what audience was going to love this book or if they were going to love it. I just hoped. But yeah, so it was so the book came out on February 1st, but it was already hitting the TikTok thing. I was not like fully expecting. It hit Instagram first, and then I started getting this feedback, and then people like yourself were reaching out, and I was like, well, that's very cool. But then then it hit TikTok, and then it just like then the memes started.
Yeah.
And I only repost them every once in a while, but they're so much fun.
Yeah.
And so that's been wild. It was like, and that pretty much hit towards the end of January, right before it came out. And so now there's a new wave of people who are going to get this book because it just came out. So I'm not sure how that's going to go, but yeah, the reception has been like crazy and really fun. And I'm just so happy that people are embracing the story.
It's definitely being embraced. And to go back to what you kind of just mentioned about how the book doesn't necessarily hit all of like the beats of a traditional romance book. What
Mm-hmm.
I love though is that obviously this is a love story between Evie and
Mm-hmm.
Carter. That's no doubt. That's the love
Of
story. But
course.
there's such a major component of this that's like a love story of a mother and a daughter, and
Mm-hmm.
like that whole motherhood understanding, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
sacrifices one makes as a mom. And obviously, I'm not a mom yet, but I love my mom, and I know all my mom has done and continues to do for
Sure.
me. And I've read so many books that have these like very deep through lines of motherhood. So I'm wondering why you wanted to include that as a major aspect of this book, obviously without giving so many spoilers away, but why it was important to include it in this story and not just leave the story as a love story between Evie and Carter.
Right. So a big part of this is what one of the themes I wanted to convey from the very get-go, and this came through in that original story idea that I had, was the differences between what a mother or a woman in general living her life portrays to the outside world versus the hidden world that we all keep inside of us. And there may be like, or the unfulfilled potential, or the like the secrets that we feel we can't share, the parts of ourselves that we hide.
Mm,
And I wanted that to be a really big part of Evie's story because that is a actual like critical part of the plot.
mm,
And so a big part of that, and whether you have children or not, like you said, if you everybody kind of understands the dynamic between parents and children, that there is that invisible wall that is between them just by nature of the relationship, that you don't, they may be the person who knows you better than anybody, but they may not actually know what your like the truth of your heart is. And then for parents in particular, parents have to hide certain parts of themselves in order to kind of raise their kids and be a good example and not confuse them and give them like reasons to go to therapy. So that's the goal. So, but in doing that, you do have to keep a huge part of yourself quiet.
right.
And so I loved giving her daughter Lainey the opportunity to hear more about it. And it's funny because I've had a couple people go like, there are some moments in here where she's talking about like some moments with Carter that you might not necessarily share with your children because that's
Right.
kind of icky. But that's where we come back to she's not actually telling her daughter like,
Yeah.
oh, and then he placed his hand here.
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's like these are memories that are playing out in her head, and then she's conveying that overall feeling of this love, this great love that she had in her life that made her who she is, and her daughter never knew about it.
Mhm. I obviously don't want to touch on like any spoilers, but I
Mm-hmm.
know everyone's going to want to know your like, because you said you didn't really outline like your vision of the story,
Mm-hmm.
the twists, the ending, all of that. From
Mm-hmm.
the very beginning, you knew how the story was going to play out, right? You knew from the very beginning this was what was
I did.
right. So was it hard to actually put pen to paper to make that happen? Like, I know a lot of people reading it, and I felt the same way. Like, it was a cathartic experience reading this book. Like, from beginning to end, it just felt very
Mm-hmm.
like full circle.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like to write and like knowing kind of how you're going to end this book?
Yeah. So Um, like I had, like I said, I had Carter and Evie's whole story and the feel of it came through very quickly, but I was like a little bit later, maybe just even a couple days later, where I started to think, okay, this is where this story is going to go. And um, it was a very emotional book to write. I mean, I mean, there are like blood, sweat, and tears in the words on this on the that went into this
Mm,
book. And, I just, it was like, it was hard, but then it was kind of fun at the same time because
yeah.
I was able to, it changed the tone and it changed the structure. And I'm already hearing from people who are reading it a second time because they wanted to read it a second time. And then, and it's a completely different reader experience to read it the second time around. And so it was just, I mean, as a writer, it was really kind of fun because I was able to play with the tone in a certain way. But yeah, it was like a really emotional thing to write. I feel like I poured out huge, like I was like scraping at my soul and my heart, putting these words on the page. It's a very emotional, it was a very cathartic experience for me to write it too. It
Yeah.
was like therapy.
Imagine. But
Yeah.
looking back at the writing experience as a whole, like what would you say
Hmm.
were some of like the really easy moments to write? Like what were the scenes that just like it was them talking to you and you were just like the conduit putting the words on the page. Like you were it was
Hmm.
easy for you. What were those moments? Because it really felt like all of their interactions were so honest. And I just feel like
Hmm.
it must have come to you in some sort of like easy, they're whispering your ear in your ear kind of way, because that's how it read.
That's how it came. That's how it, yeah, that's exactly how it arrived. It's funny because, and I actually have a photo of this and I was going to post on social media at some point in time in the next week or so. But I have like, people have always complimented me on my handwriting. I have really like nice handwriting. I just do. I don't know why, but it's like, it's very pretty, kind of like neat and tidy handwriting. But I write longhand. I wrote most of this book longhand, or um, and then I usually like the first draft's almost always longhand. When you see the pages that I write, it's illegible chicken scratch. It's upside down, it's sideways, it looks like completely chaotic. It's on all different sides of the paper and on like grocery receipts, and it's just like everywhere. And it's a complete, it doesn't even look like my handwriting, and it's so weird. But that's when I say like it comes like these scenes in the dialogue, it came like a waterfall and I just could not catch it fast enough. So I would write as fast as I possibly could to catch as much of it as I can. And that's the way I tend to write. That's why I'm saying like I have stacks of like this of scenes that are on the cutting room floor from this book.
Yeah.
So those are the easy parts, like the interactions with them, the scenes with the feel of the band, all of it, those were very easy. The hard parts were really trying to get the dialogue right in like the last quarter of the book, where I'm having those really difficult conversations and that I needed to convey a whole lot of backstory and a whole lot of reasoning and explanations in a concise way that didn't drag on. So those were in very precise ways that didn't give anything away. Like that was very difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of those pieces that now didn't make it into this book,
Uh-huh.
are you thinking about putting them out in the world in another capacity, like bonus content? Have people asked you even about it? Have you thought about it? Would it make
There
sense
is this
even to the story to have it out there? I don't know.
um I will not reveal too much about that, but I will say that there will probably be something done with a lot of the material that I have. So how that is going to come to fruition, I'm not positive yet, but I can say that Um, yeah, I think that there will be I think there will be enough people out there who want to see and
For
hear
sure.
more about like what this band was going through. And then there's just a lot of like there's a whole, the book's pretty long. It's like 116,000 words or something like that. It's a fairly long book for women's fiction. And the part of her with actually like with the band on the road is actually not that long because I mean, we're covering 3 decades here. It's a very epic story that's going this, so I had a lot of ground to cover. But so there's a lot of fun scenes there with her and the band that really kind of give a lot more perspective about what exactly was so compelling about Evie. Like why, aside from her just being Evie,
Mhm.
but like why was she so compelling?
I'm so excited. I know everyone who loves this book will be eager for more, eager for more.
Hmm. Hmm.
But now I guess that you've kind of temporarily, I guess, moved on from MAYLUNA. It's now out in the world for everyone to read. Like, what are you working on next? Are you able to share anything coming out. I don't want to pressure you. Maybe you're taking a breather for once. That's possible. But just one,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I have a superstition about writing. I don't talk about exactly what I'm writing. A lot of writers will say like, "Oh, I'm starting the next book," or "This is what I'm working on," or they have writing partners, or they work closely with their editors and agents. I don't do any of that. It's like my family doesn't even know I'm writing. Like, I mean, they know I'm writing because that's what I do for a living. But my point is, I don't say like, "Oh, this is what I'm working on." I just sort of like called my best friend one day and was like, "Hey, I finished a book," and she's like, "Okay." Awesome. It's that
Yeah.
sort of feeling because I feel like once I've told the story, even if it's a sentence, like a summary, oh, I'm writing a book about this, like Gene Smith went here. Once I've said that story, it's like the universe is saying, oh, okay, you told the story. Now it's done. I don't need to give you any more.
Hmm.
So I keep it very close. But I will say that I'm always working on something. I am working on the next book. And we have a project coming up with A Day Like This. So, which I am like super excited about. So I'm working on that as well.
Busy. All good things.
Yeah,
With all good things.
yeah, yeah. And I homeschool my kids, and so they're home with me while I have two teenage daughters,
Oh
so
my
they're home
God.
with me. So it's like my writing routine has changed and evolved over the years. But it's funny because when I really need to dig in and get into the nitty gritty, it's like that waiting until the house is quiet and writing in like near darkness with headphones on. That's the magic hour for me.
Wow. That's insane. That's incredible. You have a lot going on.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I
Um,
do.
well, thank you so, so much for taking the time to chat. This was incredible. Obviously, you know how much I love the book. Everyone that has not yet read it that listens to this, I'm sure will be running to go grab it. And I'm wishing you so much success, and I can't wait to hear what you've got going on coming down the pipeline. All this stuff sounds so exciting. I'm very much looking forward.
Oh, well, good. Thank you so much. Yeah, keep an eye out there. I'll be releasing little tidbits about MAYLUNA here and there. Some behind the scenes fun things that I think people will like. Some
Amazing.
things about yeah, each of the band members, and then there's a playlist out there, all of which you can grab on my social media. So you can, for anybody who's a music lover, they can grab that. And
Amazing.
yeah, just sort of stay tuned for the rest.
Well, we will. We're very excited, all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.